there was a time when it was a man's world, and it isn't any longer, and that's a good thing. And I'm not kind of virtue signaling, this is just fact. People encounter terrorism, a lot of them are women, and they're really good at it.
Hello everyone, my name is Thea Darracott and I am the Acting Executive Retail Editor and Events Director at Condé Nast Traveller. Some of you may already be familiar with our Traveller's Tale series, which we run live in London, while during this period of lockdown, we'll instead be hosting a series of recorded Zoom conversations. Frank Gardner OBE is the BBC's award-winning security correspondent, reporting on issues of both domestic and international security. His first book, Blood and Sand, was a critically acclaimed bestseller, examining his passion for the Arab world and his survival and recovery from being shot 6 times at close range by al-Qaeda terrorists. Since then, he has written Far Horizons, which documents his travels around the world, and 2 novels, Crisis and Ultimatum, which are part of an action-packed series of modern spy thrillers. He is currently working on his 3rd novel, which will be released in the spring of 2021. Thank you so much for joining us today, Frank. I just wanted to start by asking you, what makes a good story?
I think you've got to have a bit of intrigue. You've got to want to turn the page. That is ultimately, I remember there was one, I'm not going to slag it off, but there was one book that I read when I was very young, and before you even started the book, you had to read a massive, great introduction about who all the characters were. And I thought, you know what? I can't be bothered with that. I don't think I read beyond the first chapter. So I've always tried with my books, and everybody's obviously got a different style. I mean, yes, you need a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you need a bit of jeopardy in there. I think if it's a spy novel, but you've got to want to know what happens next. And I keep my chapters really short. When I read my first novel, Crisis, I was watching Breaking Bad at the time, and I love their really rapid, slick scene changes. They're so clever, it was brilliant. And I think sort of by subliminally, I think that sort of style probably translated into what I was putting on the page. I wasn't inspired by Narcos. I hadn't seen Narcos when I wrote Crisis, which is about a narco plot. But definitely the idea of these short chapters where I want people, I love it when somebody says on Twitter, "Damn you, Frank Gardner, I've lost a whole weekend reading your book." That works for me.
I wanted to ask you about your writing process. When does an idea come to you, or do you sit down and work on something that's interested you? How do you go about starting your writing process?
For the first one, it was literally a case of opening the laptop on a long flight to LA, 11 hours. I thought, there aren't any particular movies I really want to see in this selection. I think I'll open up the laptop and start writing a novel. And I kind of pretty much write each chapter. I have a vague idea what's going to happen, but it's quite, because you've written a novel, you're almost like a puppeteer. You're deciding, what shall I let happen to him or her? It's kind of fun then.
Now, I want to talk to you about your latest novel, without any plot spoilers, but I think I'm allowed to say that it does involve a biological weapon, a virus. How is writing that, or editing, now you're in the final stages, but how is that during the time of lockdown? It must feel like someone's stolen your plot a little bit.
It really does. It's incredibly annoying. I started writing this 3rd novel in late 2018, and last year was very busy for a number of reasons, and I wasn't able to get the novel finished in time. And I'd made visits to Porton Down, to the Defence Science Technical Labs. I've interviewed epidemiologists, virologists. I learnt about the R0. All of this I did last year before any of us, including me, had even heard of coronavirus. So it's pretty frustrating, because I'm sure that when it does come out, some people will say, he's just jumping on the back of coronavirus. I am not. It's actually as far as the novel's concerned, it's a real inconvenience. And what I've had to do since is to go back to the beginning of the novel and make it COVID relevant. So I've had to put in constant back references to PPE, to social distancing, to COVID, etc. Otherwise, it'd be weird because the novel will be set in March 2022. That's where it's set.
I think it must be a very difficult time for most novelists now who are writing books set in the near future without knowing what the end of coronavirus looks like.
The wonderful thing about fiction is that you're not bound by the truth. So you can make up any ending you want, really. And these novels are first and foremost spy adventure novels. One of the things that I'm very keen about in these books is to give a decent showing for the very impressive women I've met in security and intelligence. There was a time when it was a man's world, and it isn't any longer, and that's a good thing. And I'm not kind of virtue signaling, this is just fact. A lot of the most impressive people that I have met in my daily dealings, not daily, but my work dealings, where we are trying to get information or get briefings from people in counterterrorism, a lot of them are women, and they're really good at it.
And I also wanted to ask you, this crosses into your work as a journalist as well, but how do you get under the skin of a place to be able to reflect it accurately? I mean, it's something that as a journalist you have to do sometimes in very short amounts of time, although obviously now you're so familiar with all the places that you're covering. I just wondered if there was anything in particular, any routine that you have when you arrive in a location to try and get familiar with it.
There's a difference between flying into a place to do a story and being the correspondent on the ground. If you're the resident correspondent and it's your patch, and you've been there a while, you're pretty much expected to know it and have your own contacts and work them, as it were. So, I was based in Dubai first and then Cairo. So that was sort of relatively straightforward, but you do rely very much on local experts. And I think, the unsung heroes in international journalism are the local fixers and journalists, because, we fly into somewhere like Iraq or Gaza, and we report on terrible things happening, but they have to stay there and live the story every day. And after we leave and pack up, they're left with the daily dangers, which often can be quite personal. Somebody saying, we know you've talked to the media, you've been collaborating with the Western press or something like that. It can be quite dangerous. They take bigger risks often than we do. But what is the process? Well, we also depend quite a lot on what's called the newswires, Reuters, AFP, PA, Press Association, which will give you the kind of latest facts of what's happened, just no frills, just gives you, what's going on. So that's one source. There will be local fixers and stringers who will introduce us to people who we can then interview and find out a bit from them. A lot of it is picture-led in television, of course. A good TV story needs very few words. I remember once there was the head of news at BBC, I think it was, recommended watching a report by Matt Fry when he was our correspondent in Jakarta. And it was brilliant, actually. It started with, there was a huge riot in Jakarta. And it started with this big kind of explosion, and then they dipped the sound, and he said, Indonesia has a new president. And then up the sound, bang, boom, crash, the agony continues. And it was poetic almost. It was very clever. And, sometimes people make the mistake of talking too much over the pictures. If you've got a good camera person and a good video editor, they will construct us a really good video story for you that you don't actually have to do much talking. Radio is different, of course, as is print. There you've actually got to work a bit harder.
Do you have a favorite medium?
I think I still probably prefer telly, because I bought my first video camera when I was in the Gulf. I went up to the blazing oil wells. Long before I actually joined the BBC, when I was still working as an investment banker. For fun, I would practice doing these pieces to camera. I know it's pathetic, but I was doing this sort of, Frank Gardner, BBC News Kuwait. And, my girlfriend at the time said, what are you doing? You're a banker, get over it. I said, no, I am going to do this. I'm going to do this news thing. Trust me, I will. Yeah, right. And I did.
You did.
So, I have a sort of almost a kind of emotional attachment to television because I shadowed a cameraman at BBC in my first year there. And it took me ages to get a staff contract, but I was freelance for a long time, but I shadowed, the cameramen and women are brilliant there. They're really good. And I shadowed one of them and he taught me all about how to do a setup, how not to cross the line, how to backlight something, how to do a proper sequence. And I then started to put that into practice. And so when I set myself up in the Gulf back in 97. And with that, I was able to be independent and do my own films there, all over Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and places.
And I also wanted to ask you how the stories you've told have changed you. Do you feel that they've changed your personality at all? What have you learned from them?
I don't think they've changed me that much. I mean, some of my colleagues have seen really awful things, which will haunt them forever. I haven't really. I mean, I've seen sort of misery and deprivation and, trashed places in Afghanistan and Iraq and extreme poverty in places like Sudan and Egypt. But I haven't seen real horror. So obviously I've experienced it because I got shot, but luckily enough, touch wood, and I'm touching the table here, I haven't so far had PTSD. Now, I'm not complacent about it. It can come back and bite you 11 years on, or however many years on. Apparently it can just rise up and get you when you don't expect it. It's always possible. But what I did was I had a lot of visitors in hospital. I talked to everybody. I told everybody what happened. I didn't hide anything. And I wrote my first book, Blood and Sand, which was a pretty grisly, no holds barred account of what it's like to be shot 6 times and what it's like to spend 7 months in hospital afterwards, being dissected, prodded, poked, injected, and generally having a pretty horrible time. There's a documentary that's coming out later this year by an independent company, but on BBC Two, called Being Frank. Their title, not mine, but it's going to be coming out, and it's part of, I think, like a disability series. And I'm going to show some pretty sort of shocking things in that.
I wanted to ask you as well about your approach to pain. I mean, your control over your mind is so impressive. Can you tell us about how you handle pain when you experience it?
Well, not very well, to be honest there. I'm glad you think I've got good control over it, but I'm a big softy heart. I don't even like cold showers. So fun enough, I just put it on Facebook the other day, actually, because last weekend was what's called my Alive Day. So June the 6th was the 16th anniversary of getting shot and surviving. Sadly, my wonderful cameraman, Simon Cumbers, did not survive, and that's such a tragedy. But 16 years on, I still get horrendous neuropathic nerve pain in my legs. I haven't got it right now, but it flares up from time to time. And it basically, sometimes it feels like somebody's taking a mallet to the inside of your knee and going wham like that. And the pain lasts for about 5 seconds. It's almost like a spasm of pain. Sometimes it can feel like an electric charge that is being pressed to your ankle. It's all below the level of injury. So I got shot in the lower back, and my paralysis sort of kicks in around the knees. And so basically everywhere below there I get pain, but also under the thighs. And it's really bad when it happens. How do I deal with it? I tense my body like that. I kind of tense all my muscles for about 5 seconds until it passes. Exercise helps a lot. I have a hand bike, or hand trike, And that's really good, actually. Funnily enough, when I'm on assignment, and I was recently in Colombia doing some quite interesting riding through a canyon on a horse, even though it was obviously a bit saddle sore being on a horse, it was fine. I think because I needed all my concentration to stay upright on this horse and not to kind of go crashing into the canyon, basically. But I don't take any medication for it. None of it works for me anyhow. Alcohol works sometimes, but I don't ever want to I don't want to see that as a remedy. I think that's a slippery slope to go down. I basically just have to fight through it when it comes, when it hits, and know that it won't last for that long.
I just also wanted to touch on Colombia briefly, because of the documentary that you've just made and about the biodiversity there. I was so impressed. I had no idea, more for me, for knowing quite how abundant it is with life. How was it traveling through the rainforest? I know you went with Kew Gardens. What was it like?
There, it was just wonderful. I mean, you've been travel editor, you know, you must have been to some wonderful places. Colombia is a jewel. It still has, obviously, a reputation as a massive cocaine producer, and there are still narco gangs there, but it is an infinitely safer place now than it was when I first went there in '96. It's a good travel destination. It's an eco-tourism destination crying out to be developed. So the trip we did, we went to a part of the Magdalena Valley called the Serranía de las Quinchas. It's the last tropical rainforest that hasn't been cut down in that Magdalena Valley, one of the 3 valleys that runs up to the Caribbean coast. And it was incredible. I mean, the only way for me to do it was on horseback. So the others were walking, but I was on horseback, and it was fantastic. I put a pillow on my bum and just held on, and it was just thrilling to see all these dazzling butterflies dancing around you and the whooping toucans and parakeets and stuff. And we stayed with a hermit in his remote thatch hut, and just waking up to the dawn chorus there, deep in the jungle, and just these valleys, one after another, receding into the distance of blue ridges, clothed in jungle. But there is a serious and sad side to it, because the jungle, the rainforest, is being systematically cut down, mostly by cattle ranchers, by people clearing it for cattle ranching. And Colombia has this amazing asset, this wonderful natural heritage, which it needs to preserve. And they need to find a way to pay the very people who are currently cutting it down to actually guard it. If they can come up with some, it shouldn't be difficult. Just hive off some money from the tourism budget, and save the forest and pay those very people in the same way as Rwanda has done. I don't know if you've been to the Virunga there. Have you been there?
I haven't, I'm afraid.
So up in Rwanda, the Rwandan government has hired a huge amount of poachers who used to be poachers, and turned them into gamekeepers and guardians of the forest. And they know exactly where the gorillas are, the mountain gorillas. They know which family is where, and they understand their habits. So they now guide parties of people to find them. And that's what they need to do in Colombia. You know, they need to make these eco-experts, you know, they won't be expensive. And that's the only way at the moment, I think, that I can see that they can save this thing, because they've got all these grand projects that might or might not come to fruition in 3 years' time of, I don't know, papaya farms, butterfly farms, ecotourism, but it's pipeline stuff, it's not there. And we interviewed illegal loggers, all masked up pre-COVID, this was in February, and they said, look, we hate cutting down these trees, we don't want to do it, we know it's our heritage, but I've got bills to pay, my wife's in hospital, I've got to pay $600 for all the medication and her hospital treatment. This tree is going to pay her bill. Yeah. And that's the reality of it for them.
It must have been amazing, though, to be there, to witness it, and then to hopefully, it must be quite a wonderful feeling to feel that your reporting could potentially change the fate of the rainforest.
Well, that's what I hope. I mean, we went with Colombian and South American botanists and naturalists, And I felt absolutely privileged to be there with them. And my job, obviously, is to make the story out of it and to broadcast it, to get it on air. Because if I hadn't been there, it wouldn't have been on air. It's that simple. And I've actually, I think on Sunday, we put up a piece on the Colombia's fabulous flora and fauna, which I put on the website, because I took my camera. I do a lot of nature photography. I've got this great big sort of 500mm lens, which I lugged around Colombia. And it was lovely. I'd get up before breakfast, and when we were based in one place, and just wait for the butterflies and hummingbirds and photograph them. Such fun.
And a close run-in with a snake as well, not for you, but for one of your guides, I understand.
Well, it was a boa constrictor. It was quite a big one. And yeah, you can hear him on the film saying, watch out, boa. I mean, they're not venomous in the way that a pit viper is, but very, very alarmingly, the week before we came, the son of the hermit who we stayed with, he was clearing some of the path through the forest for us, and a fer de lance pit viper, Bousserops atraps, bit right through his gumboot and bit into his foot. And these things are really lethal. They kill more people than any other snake in Latin America. So he had, roughly speaking, you've got 6 hours. If you don't get the antivenom in 6 hours, at the very least, you're going to have an amputation, but you're probably going to die, because it completely breaks down your blood system, your blood walls. It's hemotoxic and neurotoxic. So it messes with your nervous system, and it's not one you want to do. So his father, who was 60, piggybacked him, carried him all the way up the mountain, got to the road. They flagged down some people on horseback. They raced to the nearest village. They only had 2 vials of antivenom. They gave him those. Then they drove him as fast as they could to Boyacá Hospital, where they just managed to save his leg. So he was probably minutes away from either losing his leg or dying, but he was in hospital for weeks.
Gosh, what an incredible father as well, to carry him on his back.
And this guy, like he's 60, he carried me as well, actually. So initially going down the slope, it was that steep on horseback. I'm not exaggerating. It was a 45-degree canyon. And I've discovered, I can ride on the level, I can ride uphill, even when it's quite steep. But going down is really difficult because the horse is stumbling. Yeah. And with each stumble, I nearly fall off. I nearly crash forward and fall off it. And so I had to say, guys, time out. I can't do this. I'm going to fall off this. And it looked like I wasn't going to be able to come to that part of the trip, which would have been a big shame. So this guy, the father, who lives by himself in this little hermit place, he said, well, why don't we work out a way to carry him? So they hacked down some bamboos and put them through the wheelchair, and then they just carried me like that, and it worked.
It's incredible. So I have one final question for you. Where are you off to next?
It's a long, long way away, Scotland.
You should be able to make it, I think.
Yeah.
Is that for pleasure?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, we're not, in BBC, for the time being, we don't have any plans to do any kind of foreign trips at the moment. Obviously under coronavirus, we'll see what happens with restrictions. But, the 14-day quarantine thing is a little bit of a disincentive to going anywhere, frankly. So I'm actually going to use this time there to see a bit more of this country. I've spent, so much time. I'm embarrassed to say that in 2018, I totted it up. I went through 30 airports internationally. And I'm sure there are people who've been through more than that. I'm not proud of that. I was already thinking, for ecological reasons, I needed to cut down on flying. But I'm actually just going to try and see a lot more of this country and get to know it better. So I'm kind of looking forward to that.
I bet you are. Well, I hope you have a wonderful time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Thea.